In the quaint town of Montrose, nestled between the rugged cliffs of the Scottish coast and the tranquil sweep of its windswept bay, history did more than linger, it breathed. It was not merely remembered in monuments or preserved in dusty museums. It pulsed in the cobblestones, sighed through the narrow lanes, and rustled in the branches of trees older than memory itself. A soft rain had fallen earlier that morning, leaving the air rich with petrichor. The rooftops glistened as though the past itself had been freshly polished. Amid this symphony of time, a grand but tired building stood sentinel near the edge of Panmure Terrace, a 4-story Georgian apartment block built in 1843. Its once proud sandstone facade, now streaked with age and moss, gave it the look of a forgotten noble watching over a world that had moved on. Inside, the air smelled of plaster dust, aged wood, and something else, something ancient. Tarps rustled softly under the scaffolding, and sunlight from the high arched windows danced across the broken remains of old cornices and stripped walls. Time had carved deep grooves into the floors, and the structure groaned with the weight of memory.
"This place is whispering," Helen McCullough murmured to herself, brushing dust from her forearm.
Helen stood at the heart of the apartment's main drawing room, surrounded by the chaos of renovation. A historian by training and instinct, she had never been satisfied simply reading history. She longed to touch it, to see it, to feel it settle beneath her nails, and breathe it in with the mortar dust. Her olive-green eyes, sharp and hungry, scanned every detail of the exposed room. She wore worn jeans streaked with paint and a faded sweater pulled tightly against the chill of the old stone walls. Her thick chestnut hair was pulled back loosely, and her boots, sturdy and brown, were scuffed from exploration.
"It's always in the bones," she whispered again. "The stories are in the bones of the building."
Helen had been hired to research and document any historical significance found during the renovations. What was initially thought to be a simple architectural restoration had quickly become a more involved affair. Old letters in the walls, a child's toy hidden beneath floorboards, and fragments of centuries-old wallpaper told stories of laughter and grief, of music drifting across parlors, of lives once deeply rooted and now all but forgotten. She moved toward the far wall where part of the plaster had recently fallen away, revealing wooden beams beneath. Just as she bent to examine them, a clear metallic chime echoed through the room, sharp, unexpected, like a bell tolling from the past. The sound had no clear origin, yet it struck her with a shiver. She turned, and that's when she saw it. A glint, a shimmer in the dust, a tiny object rolling slowly across the uneven wooden floor. It came to a gentle stop near the toe of her boot.
"What in the world?"
She knelt, her breath catching as her fingers closed around the cool, heavy disc. The dust clung to its surface, but beneath it gleamed the unmistakable hue of aged gold. She wiped it gently with her sleeve. The coin was worn, but its details held firm against time's erosion. On one side, a majestic stag stood frozen in a proud stance, its antlers rising like a crown, its body muscular and regal. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each line etched with delicate precision. She turned it over, her breath hitched, a face stoic, stern, clearly of noble bearing, but not one she recognized. Below the image was the date, 1792.
"No, that can't be right."
Helen had spent her career immersed in the study of Scottish history. Monarchs, revolts, noble families, she knew their faces, names, coats of arms. But this face was a ghost, unnamed in every volume she had ever read. Was it a forgery, an artist's creation, or was it something else entirely, an artifact of a history that had not yet been told?
"I need answers," she whispered more to herself than anyone, "and I'm going to find them."
Her fingers clenched tighter around the coin, as though it might vanish, as though it might dissolve into myth the moment she looked away. The air seemed to shift around her, thicker now, pregnant with possibility. Outside, the rain began again, soft and persistent, like nature itself, applauding her discovery. And beneath the apartment's ancient floors, far deeper than she knew, a long dormant secret stirred. Helen didn't sleep that night. The coin sat on the table beside her desk lamp, catching the amber light as though feeding on it, demanding attention. Her modest apartment above the Montrose bookshop felt colder than usual, the scent of old paper mingling with the remnants of dust clinging to her sweater. She had made tea twice, and left both cups untouched as she stared at her laptop screen, cross-referencing royal lineages, obscure uprisings, forgotten dynasties. No trace. No king or prince from 1792 bore that face. No known mint bore that emblem of the stag with such elegance. It was as though the coin had been minted in a dream, too detailed to be fiction, too unknown to be fact.
It doesn't make sense, she muttered, scrolling through another set of museum archives. How could something so finely crafted exist without record?
As dawn broke, she finally leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. Frustration swirled with fascination. Her instincts told her this wasn't a forgery or a souvenir. This coin had weight, both literal and historical. The next morning, the streets of Montrose bustled with quiet, unhurried life. Shops opened with the chime of bells, fishermen hauled crates toward the harbour, and the church clock struck 10 with steady, solemn gongs. But for Helen, the world had shifted. There was an itch in her mind that only answers could scratch. She clutched the coin tightly in a small pouch and made her way down High Street toward a building she had frequented often over the years, Montrose Historical Society. It stood like an old professor, quiet, dignified, slightly crumbling, but full of stories if you knew how to ask the right questions. Its stone walls bore the patina of weather and reverence. Behind the main desk, sorting through a shelf of old maritime logs, stood a familiar figure.
"Well, if it isn't our most relentless truth digger," said Angus Reed, looking up with a warm, weathered grin. "What brings you to disturb an old man's peace on a Tuesday morning?"
"I've found something," Helen said, stepping forward and placing the pouch gently on the table between them.
Angus, who had served as the curator of the society for over 4 decades, straightened slightly. Though his shoulders bore the stoop of age, his hands remained steady as he opened the pouch and pulled out the coin. Silence fell between them.
"My word," he breathed, turning it in his fingers. This is no trinket. Where did you come by it?"
Inside one of the wall cavities at the apartment I'm working on, behind a panel, hidden like it was meant to be forgotten.
Angus examined the stag side first, then the unknown face. His brows furrowed deeper with every turn.
"I've seen thousands of coins in my time," he murmured. "But this, I've never seen this face, and the craftsmanship, it's not amateur. Whoever made this had resources and purpose."
He placed the coin down gently, as if it might bite.
I searched for hours last night. Nothing in the royal genealogies, nothing in the coinage records. It's like it doesn't exist.
"Or wasn't meant to," he said almost under his breath.
Helen leaned forward, her voice hushed.
What do you mean?
"Sometimes history buries things on purpose," he said, locking eyes with her. "Not everything is forgotten by accident."
His words lingered in the air like mist.
I need to know who he was. I was hoping your archives might help.
"Have you tried the town archives? Isabel Grant still oversees the restricted sections. She knows every document in that place. Just tread carefully, Helen. If this is what I think it is, you might not be just uncovering a story. You might be stepping into one."
Helen paused at the door, touched by the gravity in Angus's voice. For a moment, she felt the enormity of it all. Not just a coin, but a calling. As she walked briskly through the cool morning streets toward the Montrose archives, her thoughts buzzed. What kind of truth required this much hiding? And how far was she willing to go to reveal it? Above her, a lone stag stood etched into the weathered lintel of an old building, half hidden by ivy, unnoticed until now. She stopped.
How long have you been watching? She whispered.
The ivy rustled faintly, as though in reply. The Montrose archives sat tucked between a crumbling chapel and a bakery that always smelled of cinnamon and rising bread, its sandstone walls discoloured by salt-laden winds. Despite the centuries it had endured, the building exuded a quiet authority, as if time itself had granted it the right to keep its secrets sealed. Helen approached with purposeful strides. The sun broke through the clouds intermittently, casting shifting shadows across the facade, as if the building were alive, watching, weighing her intent. She passed through the wrought-iron gates, pushing open the heavy oak doors with a familiar creak. The air inside was cooler, denser. Rows of polished wooden shelves rose like sentinels, each housing volumes bound in cracked leather or worn cloth. The scent of old paper and preservation oils filled her lungs like a sacrament. At the central desk, illuminated by a large stained-glass window that scattered kaleidoscopic light across the parquet floor, sat Isabel Grant. Slender and sharp-eyed, Isabel looked every bit the gatekeeper of Montrose's oldest records.
Well, well, if it isn't Helen McCullough, she said, glancing up from her notes. You look like a woman with a mystery in her pocket. You're not far off, Helen replied, removing the pouch from her coat and drawing out the coin. I need your eyes on something.
Isabel took it with the reverence of a surgeon handling a rare organ. Her fingers turned it slowly under the light, eyes narrowing with academic precision.
The stag, fine detail, too refined for forgery, and this face, no inscription. None, no name, just the date, 1892. Intriguing.
Isabel turned and led Helen toward a set of double doors near the rear of the room. Behind them lay the restricted archives, a section few were allowed to access, its contents spanning deeds, correspondences, maps, and journals, some dating back to the 12th century. Helen followed closely, her pulse quickening. Each footfall echoed in the high-ceilinged chamber as they descended a short stairwell into the archive vaults below. Here, the light dimmed. Brass lamps hummed faintly along the walls, casting golden halos on the narrow aisles.
If this face belongs to someone of historical note, we'll find a trace, she said. Unless, she paused, pulling open a drawer with practiced ease, he was never meant to be remembered. That's what Angus said, that history buries some things on purpose.
They pored over documents, land grants, noble registries, personal journals. Time slipped by unnoticed, marked only by the flicker of lamps and the rustle of parchment. Then, hours later, Isabel's breath caught.
Here, look.
Helen leaned over the long oak table, eyes scanning the aged document Isabel held open. It was a ledger, dated 1792, listing attendees to a private gathering held at the Montrose estate of Lord Callum Fraser. No official record of the event existed elsewhere. Yet here, amid names of nobles and merchants, was a symbol drawn next to 3 of the entries. A stag.
The Stag Society, Helen whispered, as if the words had waited centuries to be spoken aloud again. There's barely a mention anywhere else, but this is a breadcrumb.
Helen's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page. More names, more stags, and then a hand-drawn map. Ink faded but still visible, a network of tunnels beneath Montrose.
This, Isabel said softly, isn't just a ledger, it's a gateway.
The map detailed chambers beneath the city, connecting estates, crypts, and forgotten catacombs. At the center was a symbol, a circle enclosing the stag, a secret society, hidden beneath the very streets she'd walked all her life.
They met underground, Helen said slowly. They weren't just noble dissenters, they had infrastructure, intent. And a leader, Isabel added, her gaze drifting back to the coin. A leader whose face was stamped in gold but never in record.
Helen stared at the map. Its lines were shaky but deliberate. She could trace them with her fingertip. She could follow them. Something stirred deep within her, a blend of awe and purpose. She didn't just want to find the truth anymore. She had to.
I need to go down there. Then you'll need permission. The council keeps those tunnels sealed for safety. Many are collapsed and some haven't seen light in 200 years. Collapsed or not, I have to try.
Isabel hesitated, then handed Helen a scanned copy of the map.
If you're going to chase ghosts, be sure you're not one of them by the end.
Outside, the wind had risen, howling softly through the alleyways of Montrose. Helen stepped into its embrace, the map pressed tightly against her chest. Beneath her feet, stone upon ancient stone, the secrets of the Stag Society lay waiting. The town hall of Montrose was not used to urgent visits. Council meetings were usually quiet affairs involving zoning laws, bin collections, and the occasional grumble about bus timetables. So when Helen McCullough arrived, windswept and insistent, asking for access to the sealed tunnels beneath the town, the clerk at reception blinked at her in confusion. Soon enough, she was ushered into a wood-panelled office where the town's infrastructure officer, Mr. Colin McRae, sat sipping tea from a ceramic mug decorated with cartoon badges.
The old tunnels? He asked, raising an eyebrow. You historians do love chasing ghosts.
It's not ghosts I'm after, Helen replied, unfolding the aged map across his desk. There's historical significance here, potentially national. I'm willing to take full responsibility for my safety. I just need access.
Colin examined the map, then leaned back in his chair with a sigh.
Well, we've kept them sealed since the 80s. Some sections collapsed, unsafe, but we do have an access point under the old wool store on South Row. There's a keyed grate and reinforced ladder. I can arrange a chaperone if you'd prefer.
I work better alone.
Don't say I didn't warn you, he said, scribbling on a notepad. Here's the access code for the lock, and take a hard hat. It's not exactly a ballroom down there.
That afternoon, under a sky turned pewter grey, Helen stood outside the derelict wool store, the keycard in one hand and a backpack slung over her shoulder. Inside, the building smelled of damp stone and mildew. The floor creaked beneath her boots. In the far corner, half concealed by a rusted cart, was the access grate. She found the electronic panel and entered the code. With a mechanical click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the grate open and stared into darkness. A ladder descended into shadow. The tunnel beneath yawned open like the throat of time.
Let's see what they tried to bury, she whispered, switching on her torch.
She descended slowly, the rungs cold beneath her gloved hands. The air changed the deeper she went, growing older somehow, filled with the scent of earth, limestone, and something else. Dust baked in silence. Her boots landed on uneven stone. The beam of her torch carved a path through the darkness, revealing arched ceilings, moisture-blackened walls, and ancient support beams still holding firm after centuries. Following the map, she walked slowly, counting paces and marking turns. Her breath was the only sound. The deeper she ventured, the more it felt like she wasn't alone, not in a threatening way, but as though the tunnelites watched her, curious and waiting. Symbols began to appear, carved into the stone at regular intervals. A stag's head here, a circle enclosing antlers there. The air was thick with stillness, but her heart thudded like a drum, echoing through time. Then she saw it, a narrow passage to her left, partially hidden behind a collapsed timber brace. She squeezed through and entered a chamber shaped like an octagon. Her light swept across faded murals, long-dried torch holders, and a central stone altar, low and rectangular, covered in dust. The walls told a silent story. Scenes of masked figures standing in a circle, the stag emblem above them, a scroll held aloft. A crowned man, his features eerily similar to the unknown face on the coin, surrounded by symbols of unity, oak leaves, flames, broken chains.
This was a place of ceremony, she breathed. Not just hiding, they met here for purpose.
She circled the room slowly, eyes tracing the mural. Then something glinted behind a loose stone panel. She knelt and pulled gently. Behind it lay a wooden chest, narrow, reinforced with iron straps, and locked with a mechanism unlike any she'd seen. But age had done what time does best. With effort and a screwdriver from her bag, she pried it open. Inside were carefully wrapped bundles of parchment and a velvet pouch that jingled faintly. She opened the pouch, more coins. Identical to the one she'd found in the apartment. Dozens of them. She unwrapped the parchments next, hands trembling. They were remarkably preserved. Letters, manifestos, oaths, minutes from meetings written in meticulous hand, plans to challenge the Crown's authority, ideas for a new societal model based on equality and regional sovereignty.
They weren't just dissenters, she whispered. They were visionaries.
And at the center of it all was the man from the coin. Referred to only by a code name, the Heart King. No real name, no title. Just a role. A leader who united nobles, merchants, and free thinkers under one belief, that Scotland's identity should not be dictated by distant thrones. Helen sat back against the wall, mind reeling. The Stag Society had not simply existed. They had thrived, planned, and protected themselves through centuries of silence. The coin had been a seal. A promise. A quiet defiance cast in gold. She placed it back in her palm and stared into the face that history had forgotten.
Who were you? She asked the silence.
But the chamber only offered echoes, wrapped in the weight of centuries. Helen emerged from the tunnel just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Montrose, turning the sky a deep mauve. Her clothes were damp with underground moisture, her boots caked in soil, and her eyes wide, distant, searching. She stood in the hushed wool store, listening to the silence that followed her up from below, as though the tunnels were still breathing behind her. The world above felt different, cleaner, simpler, deceptively so. She made her way home by instinct alone, mind replaying everything she'd seen, the murals, the letters, the man whose name had been erased, but whose ideals pulsed through time like an underground. He had not wanted glory, he had wanted justice. The Heart King.
The Heart King.
She whispered the name to herself as she unlocked her apartment and shut the door behind her. The name was a fiction, perhaps, or perhaps a shield. She spread the documents across her desk, laying them out carefully. Some she photographed immediately, emailing copies to Isabel. Others she studied, eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion but alight with hunger.
They knew they wouldn't win, she murmured, tracing a line from one manifesto, but they wanted to be remembered, even if only by the worthy.
A knock on the door startled her. She checked the time, 8:30. She opened it to find Isabel Grant, her face pale but composed, framed by the glow of the hallway lamp.
"I got your message," she said, "and I had to see it with my own eyes."
Helen welcomed her in silently. Together, they stood over the letters and coins, the torch of shared discovery flickering between them.
"I don't know what's more astonishing," Isabel whispered, "that this was hidden so well, or that you found it. It wasn't just chance. The coin, it was placed, not lost, like it was waiting. Placed for you."
Isabel's words carried weight, unexpected, reverent. Helen shook her head, but inside, a seed of possibility stirred. The two women spent the next hour cataloguing, comparing handwriting, discussing known rebellions of the late 18th century that may have brushed shoulders with this hidden movement, but nothing in history quite aligned with what they'd found.
"They didn't just challenge a monarch," Helen said, holding up a page signed in looping script. "They built a system, ideas of equality, shared land ownership, voting councils of tradespeople and nobles. It's advanced. They were building a Scotland that never came to be."
Helen nodded slowly.
"And someone went to great lengths to bury them, their name, their faces, their truths."
Later that night, long after Isabel had gone, Helen wrapped the original coin in soft cloth and returned it to her jacket pocket. She couldn't sleep. Instead, she paced the length of her apartment as rain began to fall in thin streaks against the windows. And when dawn came, she found herself once again climbing the steps of the Montrose Historical Society, coin in hand, heart-pounding. Angus Reed was already inside, sipping tea from his tartan thermos, a book on early Jacobite resistance open on his lap.
"Well now," he said with a chuckle, "you've got the look of someone who's either solved a mystery or created a new one."
Helen sat across from him and placed the coin on the table.
"It's bigger than we thought, Angus."
She unfolded copies of the parchments, carefully explaining what she'd found in the hidden chamber.
So they existed, the Stag Society.
"They weren't just a circle of dissenters. They had hierarchy, vision, and they were careful. Only a few knew everything. They kept secrets in layers."
"Which makes you wonder," he said, leaning forward. "Why now? Why did the coin appear when it did? And why you?"
Helen hesitated. She had asked herself the same question over and over.
"Because I'm willing to listen," she said quietly.
Angus stared at her, then slowly nodded.
"There's more, isn't there?"
"There's always more," she said, her voice heavy with certainty. "The coin was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, maybe even here in Montrose, there's more buried truth."
Angus rose and walked to a tall cabinet at the back of the room. He unlocked it, pulled open a drawer, and returned with a brittle envelope marked with a stag-shaped wax seal.
"Then it's time I gave you this. It was handed down through 3 generations of curators. No one knew what to make of it. Maybe now it's found the right hands."
Helen opened it gently. Inside were coordinates, a diagram, and a name. R. Fraser, 1801, a direct descendant of Lord Callum Fraser, the same name listed in the Stag Society's ledger. She looked up, eyes shining.
"There's another chamber."
Montrose slumbered beneath a blanket of dawn mist, its rooftop softened by the first golden fingers of sunlight. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, the town stretching into morning like a creature stirring from a long and peaceful rest. But Helen McCullough was already awake, walking the streets she knew so well, yet which now pulsed with a different life beneath her steps. Every stone felt charged with story. Every alley whispered secrets. Every shadow suggested more. The knowledge she now carried had rewoven the very fabric of her hometown in her eyes. Montrose was no longer just quaint and historic. It was a mosaic of truths both told and untold, a stage on which the bold had once dared to dream.
"They were here," she whispered to herself, passing a weathered stone fountain at the center of an old square. "They breathed this air, walked these paths, planned revolution beneath this sky."
The letter from Angus's envelope had opened another trail, one that pointed to the Fraser estate, now a ruin swallowed by ivy, barely marked on maps. Helen knew her journey was far from over. Another chamber awaited, more documents, perhaps even a name. But for now, she chose stillness. She stopped in the middle of the street, letting the morning settle around her like soft linen. Back in her apartment, the coins lay wrapped in linen inside a locked chest beneath her writing desk. The parchments were copied and stored digitally, encoded with layers of security, but the originals remained sealed in climate-controlled storage at Isabel's archive, under watchful care. Not to be hoarded, but preserved until the time was right.
There are truths we're ready for, she said quietly, standing at her window, and those were not, but they deserve to be kept safe, just like the people who wrote them.
The stag symbol, once a curiosity, now felt sacred to her. It adorned a small pendant she wore around her neck, handcrafted from the first coin she'd discovered. Not as a trophy, but as a vow, to listen, to question, to carry the stories forward. The town, from above, looked the same to most eyes: streets, windows, markets. But to Helen, it was a layered manuscript of resistance and ideals. Every crack in the wall might conceal a scroll. Every heirloom in a stranger's attic could be a forgotten chapter. And beneath it all, the tunnels still waited. Not just as remnants of architecture, but as the breath of a dream that had once been whispered in candlelit silence. Somewhere beneath the stones, a people had tried to create something better. And though they'd been silenced, their ideas had not vanished. They had simply waited.
History is an echo, she said aloud, but if we listen hard enough, it becomes a voice.
And so Helen walked on, her boots clicking softly against the cobblestones, a historian no longer chasing relics, but stewarding legacies. The stag's secret had been shared, and with it the promise of more. For the tapestry of history has no end, only new threads, one coin, one whisper, one woman who chose to listen. The end.